Dale?
It's Dale.
Yes. How are you this evening?
Very well. And yourself?
So far, so good.
Good. Where are we? This is the 20th. The Bible's main ideas.
Correct.
All right. I have many sheets of the same thing. Maybe I was supposed to distribute these to other people.
There was a miscommunication between myself and the pastor.
Okay.
So,
All right. Am I to hand these out to somebody?
actually, there were just primarily, you were only supposed to get one of them.
Okay. Yeah, I got a whole bunch.
Yeah, that was a mistake.
That's all right. I must admit, I've not had a chance to read anything yet.
That's okay.
I'll do better next week.
Well, next week is going to be geography and timeline stuff. So really, it's the week after that it starts
Oh, okay.
to get
All
intense.
right.
We have a lot of problems here that we got people up there. That's a plan.
Good evening, everyone.
Hi, Danita, how are you?
Good. How's everybody?
Good.
Well, here also.
Great. We're going to have a beautiful harvest moon tonight.
Oh.
Uh-huh. Well, it was quite bright last night too. My backyard was all lit up.
Yeah,
was
it was
gorgeous.
very bright.
Yeah.
It's very bright if you have a skylight right over your bed.
Oh, I bet. Beautiful.
You can almost read.
Mhm.
I worry about skylights leaking.
This one is brand new, so yeah, I
Oh.
guess it can leak too. The reason it's brand new is because the old one was leaking.
Oh. I rest my case.
There you go. So are we going to have homework, or are we supposed to be reading along somewhere?
Well, the notes, if you got them, do suggest homework. The lectures are perfectly understandable without them, but obviously the more you do, the more it's enriched, I guess would be the way to put it. So,
The first package that you've sent, and then the last week you sent 2 more attachments, and I printed both of those that tell about the lectures.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, those are, so those are the lectures by Professor Cohen, which we're going to be using for this first half, which will be through the next spring. And like I said, the second half, I wanted to talk to the group about scheduling if they wanted to keep it going through the summer or break and then come back in September.
Uh-huh.
Far does it go into the summer?
It would be about another 24 weeks.
After January?
Actually, it'd be about 24 weeks after May.
Oh.
Yeah, if you look at the schedule.
We're going to know a lot.
Hopefully. Hi, Diane.
Hello.
Edna's coming.
Let's see, trying with audio.
I don't want to see eating right.
This is
There we
probably,
go. Okay, well, let's put that.
you like that?
That's okay. See.
St. Luke Lutheran Church is doing this. Wait till we collect everybody here.
Good evening, folks.
Oh, pretty.
Hi,
Oh,
Pastor.
there's somebody.
How are you tonight?
Hello.
She was there for a minute. Oh, it's Diane.
Hello.
Hello, Diane. I'm Dale.
Well, it's nice to meet you.
Likewise.
Yes. So our new participant tonight is Diane Hansen, who's a member of St. Luke.
Mhm.
And I'm waiting to see. Right now we have how do you pronounce your last name, Dale?
Ice holes.
Ice
Ice holes, yeah.
Ice
Like you got
holes.
holes in your shoes. Yeah. Now,
Ice
my
holes.
father-in-law pronounced it Eichholz, just the way that your Pastor Mary said on Sunday. But my husband made it a softer German sound
Okay,
by Eichholz.
okay. So we have Dale Eichholz, and then Carol Croto.
Yes, can you hear me?
Hmm?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Oh, thank God. Okay.
I can see you and hear you.
Oh, wonderful.
Well, now that we've had that miracle. Danita McDonald. I see the ceiling of my sister-in-law's house, so I assume that she and my wife are there. And then Diane Hansen from St. Luke. Forgive me, Nancy, I forgot your last name.
It's Hamilton.
Hamilton. Thank
Hi,
you.
everyone.
Hi,
Hello.
Nancy.
And then Pastor Heidi Johnson of St. Luke. So I did get a message from the Hellers. They're camping. So
Oh,
they'll participate via the recording. Okay, so, and we are being recorded, so it will be available on the St. Luke website in a few days, thanks to Lee. And we've had a few views on that there. So I think it's 5 after, so we'll get started. First thing I would like to do is welcome everyone. If you are watching via a recording, welcome as well. One of the things, if you're unable to come on Monday nights, but if you have any questions, please feel free to send them to me. You can either send them to my email at mimarobinson@aol.com, or you can text me at 860-961-5713. Appreciate that I am not a trained theologian. I'm primarily a historian. So if it's if there's any naughty theological questions, I'll refer them to somebody who knows more than me. In addition, I have been interacting with Professor Cohen, and I will probably contact Professor Hayes as well. So I found the people that do these courses are really quite forthcoming as far as they're happy to answer questions. So last week we had a couple of questions both in the class and outside. So I wanted to go over a couple of the terms so that we're all clear on what the background is. And so as with any sort of study, there is some vocabulary. So one of the first basic terms that we should know is the Biblical Canon. And that specifically is the set of books or texts which any particular Christian or Jewish religious community regards as authoritative scripture. So different traditions have different canons, and we'll be discussing that. The canon we're looking at is the canon of Judaism, of modern Judaism, and that's what we'll be looking at for the next several months. Now, Professor Cohen mentioned last week, but I just wanted to go over to differentiate it from some other terms people have heard. But the Hebrew Bible, which we're looking at, is also called the Tanakh, which is a Hebrew word, and it's actually an acronym. There's three parts, as he described. There's the Torah, which the Christians translate as the law, although it's actually more accurately translated as the teaching. And this is the first 5 books, which corresponds to the first 5 books of the Christian Old Testament, also called the Pentateuch, which is the 5 books of Moses, Penta meaning 5. The second section is Nevi'im, which is the prophets. And the third section is Ketuvim, which is the writings. And we will go through all of those sections in the coming weeks. So another term which you will hear, which I want to make sure everybody is exposed to, is Midrash. Now, Midrash is a process. That is the process of biblical interpretation by the ancient Jewish authorities of the Torah and the other books of the Hebrew Bible. And the result of the Midrash was what's called the Talmud. And I was asked about this last week by somebody who was here in person, so I just wanted to differentiate that. The Talmud is a production of the later modern, what was considered rabbinic Judaism. The first published one was, I think, in about the 1300s. There's 2 parts. One is the Mishnah, which is a large compendium of collection of Jewish laws and oral traditions written down. That's usually around 200 CE in the Common Era. And the other part of it is called, hang on here, the Gemara, Gemara. Now, these are parts of the Talmud, so we will not be going into those in any great depth. So, but because I was asked last week, what's the Torah compared to the Talmud? So the Talmud is a later production, a later interpretation, a collection of Jewish laws, Jewish interpretations, various things the ancient rabbis produced. So I just want to be clear on what those terms are. And last week we did have a question on the Apocrypha. Now, the Apocrypha is where we get into what's in the canon. Now, the Apocrypha are a collection of writings from what is called the intertestamentary period, which is the period between the Old Testament and the New Testament. They were written in Greek, and so the Catholic tradition actually considers 7 of these books to be what they call canonical, and so you would find them in Catholic editions of the Bible. The Protestants, and this goes back to Martin Luther, Protestants consider all of the books as apocryphal, and you, following Luther's practice, they're usually, if you buy like a larger study Bible, you'll find them in the middle. So these are about events during the period between the Old Testament and the New Testament. They are written in Greek, and that shouldn't be surprising. from the standpoint of the fact that by the time these were written, which was the period after the last books of the Old Testament were written, the primary language in the Near East, including in Judah, Israel, was Greek. Even Israelites primarily spoke Greek. They did not speak Hebrew by then. So I get a missed call here. So I just wanted to make sure everybody was clear on those terms. The Apocrypha are not considered bad books. They are considered useful for instruction, but they're not considered part of the scriptural canon by the Judaism or by most Protestant denominations. And some of them are considered canonical by the Catholics and some Orthodox, I think. So are there any questions on that? Okay, seeing none. Okay, so
Can I, just ask you, I'm gonna sign in from my phone so I can carry it around while we do bedtime routine. If you could just let me in, I'm gonna do that now. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
all right, I'm going to wait to share the screen until after you've come back in. Oh, I maybe have a call from Marty Wood.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I have a call from Marty. Marty, it says I maybe have a call from you. Okay, I'm not seeing you as on my list of admission people. It should be, but I'll resend the one I just sent to Diane, and she's in, so we know that one works. How's that? Okay, sorry about that. No, that explains that mystery. So bear with us. We want to maximize participation here. Talk amongst yourselves. If you have any difficult theological question, we have two pastors present. Okay, just sent that to Marty.
No, it's flat on the ground. No.
Okay.
The either.
So let's see.
Nice
So I'll look for
shots of Edna's house there.
Beg your
Right.
pardon?
Nice shot. You get to see it anyway. There.
There you go.
How's that?
Here's that.
Now they
You can see the wall now in your painting.
Uh-huh.
Yes, it's a good painting. Everybody should admire that painting.
What is the interpretation?
It is a dancing woman.
Really?
You could fool me from here.
If you say so.
You've got some good ones there too, Dale.
Yeah, mine are paintings by somebody who's incarcerated their ships, old sailing vessels
Oh, those are
on
nice.
the back wall. And he does that for a living. Just beautiful paintings.
Hmm. Indeed.
So I'm waiting on Marty here. Oh. Were there any other questions from last week? So this week, we're going to talk about the Bible's main ideas, even though, as Professor Cohen said, it's an anthology, so it's really a collection of books. there are some themes which are shared by the books, and so that will be discussed this week. Next week is when we're going to get some chronology and geography about what happened and where. And this is important, as we talked about, for setting out the context of the text. Let me see how we're making progress here. Hang on. Did you get it? Oh, okay. No. Okay. Okay, Marty, I've got you on speakerphone.
Okay,
How are you hearing me?
I'm hearing you well.
Okay. So why don't we proceed this way, and at least you can hear what's going on, and we'll work out the bugs. How's that?
That'll be great. So Pat and I are here.
Okay. All right, great. Okay, so I was saying that tonight's lecture will be on the Bible's main ideas and sort of the overarching themes that go across all the 24 books. And then next week, we will get into geography and the historical and geographic context, which is important for understanding where these people who wrote the Hebrew Bible are coming from, so to speak. So on that note, I am going to start by, I'm going to mute everybody's mic so we don't pick up your phone ringing or your dog barking or that sort of thing. If everybody sees the screen, can they give me a thumbs up? Okay. Oh, well, yeah. You should be able to hear the lecture.
Excellent. Okay. So I'm not saying that God is not the source of authority of the Bible. I very carefully have made no such statement. I'm saying that modern Bible scholars, when they treat the Bible, right, the fact of God's authorship, if that's the right word, is simply as a historical fact.
Is everybody hearing that?
I can hear it.
You can hear it? Okay, I just want to make sure.
I can hear it,
But I
it
don't see
says-
anything.
Right, it says lecture 3, lecture 25, lecture 23.
Oh,
It has the whole
Just
list.
has a menu.
oh,
That's the
okay.
word.
I made a mistake then. Hang on. I'm sharing the wrong screen. Are you seeing him now? No. Okay.
No, he's just a little thumbnail up at the top.
Okay.
Ready for another piece? Something to take it out and do it, or you want to bring high?
I'm restarting my iTunes here. There was a few kinks and everything.
In the sense that ancient Jews, Christians, Israelites believed. That is an important historical fact. The truth of that historical fact is a question that most modern Bible scholars won't touch, on the grounds that it's not susceptible to historical analysis.
Okay.
How is one going to prove that God really wrote, composed, inspired, pick a verb, the Bible? How would you prove that? How would you disprove that? Oh, good point. Right. So therefore, most modern Bible scholars don't touch that. But what is a clear historical fact?
We lost his voice.
So everybody seeing something?
I don't hear him.
No,
He's
you don't
like
hear him now.
frozen. He's frozen.
Oh, well, that's because I'm talking.
Oh, but he was before you started to talk.
Okay, so everything is fine. Okay.
No, I don't hear him.
Let's see. Okay. Let's back it up and try again. I'm still new at this. Bear with me.
Excellent. Okay. So I'm not saying that God is not the source of authority of the Bible. I very carefully have made no such statement. I'm saying that modern Bible scholars, when they treat the Bible, right, the fact of God's authorship, if that's the right word, is simply is a historical fact in the sense that ancient Jews, Christians, Israelites believed. That is an important historical fact. The truth of that historical fact is a question that most modern Bible scholars won't touch, on the grounds that it's not susceptible to historical analysis. How is one going to prove that God really wrote, composed, inspired, pick a verb, the Bible? How would you prove that? How would you disprove that? Oh, good point. Right. So therefore, most modern Bible scholars don't touch that. But what is a clear historical fact is the role of the book played in the community, in the development of culture, religion, civilization. That's clear. That's something which we can discuss. Is that a satisfactory answer? That is absolutely true. For some people, the authority of the Bible is explicit or obvious on itself, and divine authorship is just is. And I don't think I've said anything here, so I haven't intended to weaken or question that set of beliefs, if those are your beliefs. That's fine. However, modern Bible scholars don't work on those assumptions, at least most don't. Today, the Bible is made ideas. So last time we spoke about the Bible as an anthology, right? The collection of various books, different genres, written over a long period of time, at least several hundred years. And yet, what I'm doing today is talk about the unity of the Bible, right? Even though the Bible is a diverse document, a complex, multi-tiered, multi-level document, nonetheless, we can say the Bible says something. Or for dramatic purpose, I can say, the Bible teaches us that. What does the Bible teach us? Again, whether you want to learn it or not is not my business. I'm simply saying this is what the Bible says. What are the main points of the Bible? Here we are. Theological truth claims. God is the universal God who created the entire world and established a moral order. This, I would say, is perhaps the basic theme of the entire Hebrew Scripture. Now, we already are very deep orders already because we have a whole bunch of complicated things to disentangle here. So God is sometimes goes by different names in the Hebrew Bible. Right? And this point is made much of by the authors of the documentary hypothesis, about which you no doubt have read in your reading for today. Yes, or you will. So the documentary hypothesis, which says that the Torah was put together out of pre-existing documents, right? So one of the hallmarks, one of the beginning points of that scholarship was the observation that God goes by different names in the Torah. Sometimes God is called YHWH. Those are the four Hebrew letters, Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, whose exact pronunciation we don't know. The only thing we know for sure is that Jehovah is the wrong pronunciation for those four letters, but the correct pronunciation is actually somewhat debated. And I, as a traditionalist Jew, don't want to pronounce the name of God because, well, we Jews just don't do that. And besides, we don't know what it is. So one name of God is YHWH, usually translated Lord. Another common name for God is Elohim, usually translated God. The name YHWH, the four-letter name of God, is, as we will discuss in the coming weeks, is found only in Israelite material. Seems to be a quintessentially Israelite name of God. Whereas the other name, Elohim, is a grammatical variation on a name of God found all over the place in ancient Near East. So Elohim might be translated not so much God, but perhaps the deity. And to make it clear, this is just some idea which is everywhere in the Near East, whereas YHWH is something uniquely Israelite. Is that significant? I'm sure it's significant. I'm not sure what its significance is, but this distinction surely is significant. God creates the world. So there are two poles in the Hebrew Bible in which we talk about divine authority. One pole is God the Creator. That's where the Bible begins, Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, well, that's the old translation. We'll come back to that translation probably. Right, when God began to create the world, that's how we begin in chapter 1, verse 1 of Genesis. And the Bible will regularly appeal to the creative act of God as the legitimation of divine authority. God has the right to tell you what to do because God created the world. He's the boss, he's the landlord. You are simply tenants. This is an idea you find throughout the Hebrew Bible, especially in certain specific junctures or moments. So divine authority is based in large part on God as the God of nature, we might say. God did not just create the world. Part of creating the world is that God also establishes a moral order by which the world is supposed to work. There is good and there is evil, there is right and there is wrong, and human beings have a moral responsibility to act appropriately. And if they don't, then God, the creator God, who set up the whole world and set up the patterns for life, that God will punish you. just as that God will reward you if you follow, if you do what you're supposed to do, if you do what you're told. That's one pole, God, the creator God. The other pole is God, you might say the God of history. Right? God is involved in human events. God supervises human events. God is in charge of human events. Right? God has a stake in how humans behave. So again, if they behave properly, God rewards them. If they behave foolishly, wickedly, God punishes them. And of all the historical acts of God, the one that occupies the most space in the Hebrew Bible is the Exodus from Egypt. The Israelites are enslaved in Egypt. We'll read the story in a couple weeks. The Israelites are enslaved in Egypt, and God, via his chosen emissary Moses, God redeems them by a display of power. That act of divine intervention in human history is appealed to several times throughout Scripture as a way of showing that God can do anything. Specifically, when it comes to rewarding the righteous and punishing the wicked, we can trust God, because God will do it, God has done it, and God will do it again. These are the two poles, the creator God, the God of nature, the God of history, who goes by different names, YHWH, or Elohim, or El, but it's all one God. Okay, there is no other God. Now things start to get a little more complicated, right? There is no other God. If you open Genesis chapter 1, which you will do shortly, as of next week, and start reading, right? You see that when in the beginning God, Elohim, created blah, blah, blah. Okay, then God said this, God said that, God did this, God did that. You turn to chapter 2, you change the name from Elohim to YHWH. So God created, God fashioned, God did this, God did that, Adam and Eve, God didn't, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I don't see any other gods anywhere. You see any other gods anywhere? There are no other gods anywhere, it's just Adam, Eve, and God. Then the story keeps going of Cain and Abel, and then we have, some more stories and genealogies and blah, blah, blah. Then we come to Noah and the flood, where God talks about how evil mankind is, and he's going to wipe them out in order to start over again. First time around didn't turn out so well, so God's going to start over again via the flood, destroy all the creation in order to begin again. Very interesting. Are there any other gods anywhere in sight? The answer is no. Even the wicked generation of the flood, we are told, does not say anything about worshiping other gods. They're wicked, full of violence. Hamas is the word used in Hebrew. They're full of violence. They are acting wrongly. God has every right to punish them. Okay, fine. I'm interested in this problem about gods. Are there any other gods anywhere in sight? The answer is no. In fact, the Hebrew Bible assumes throughout, Hebrew Bible asserts throughout that there is one God from the very beginning. One God created heaven and earth. One God who established the moral order in the world. One God who keeps his eye on humanity in general, and the Israelites in particular. One God who rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked. That's all one God from day one. So these truth claims, as I described them in the Bible, are accepted by both Jews and Christians alike. This is that God, the God of the Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament. That's the God whom we Jews, we Christians, whom we worship. The Jews and Christians have a lot to argue about, don't worry, right? I'm not suggesting they're the same. I'm simply commenting that as far as this set of truths which come out of the Hebrew Scriptures, this set of truths is shared by Jews and Christians alike. There's a question about what we might call monism versus dualism. At the end of the day, Christians wind up the Jewish belief that in addition to God, there are other forces out there, some of which are hostile, some of which are contrary, some of which aim to thwart the divine will. whose sole pleasure and purpose is to seduce humans from the path, the true and straight path, to the path of error and sin, right? For Christians, this will loom very large in their understanding of the construction of the cosmos. Whereas in Jewish thought, this had its moment and then is eclipsed. Later on, Jews retreat to some extent, not completely, but to some extent from it. So for Jews, there is, I would call Judaism a monism, and Christianity I would call dualism. But you have to allow for all kinds of variations in these very large and complex systems of thought. It all depends on what you're looking at, and so on. That's part of an answer to what you're saying. I want to talk about autonomy. That's a complicated problem for both Jews and Christians alike. How do you have human autonomy and an all-powerful God? I'm not the first person to notice that these are not entirely compatible one with another. And yet they are somehow both simultaneously true. Right? Humans have autonomy, but yet God is all-powerful. Jews and Christians share that paradox. Okay, ready to move along? Thank you. Any other questions? Genesis 1, verse 26. What are we going to do when and God says, let us make Adam in our image? Let us make Adam in our image. Isn't that a plurality of gods? Well, yeah, the answer is yes, it's God speaking plurally. Does that mean that there are many gods? Or does that mean that God got help? Or does that mean that God has assistance? Well, this is a cryptic point. There's no denying it. It's cryptic. Jews and Christians will argue about this. What it really means is probably, in context, it probably means God, who is imagined as a king, right? The king, as you all know, never sits all by himself in the throne room. That's not the way kings behave. Kings always sit surrounded by attendants and officers and soldiers and ministers and dignitaries of all kinds. That's the way kings are. So God, too, is imagined as having a court. So God is speaking when it comes to the climax of the creation of Adam, which means humanity, the climax of creation, then here God is working with his court. That's probably what it means. And then later Jews ran with that one way, and Christians ran with that in a very different way. And that's all I'm going to say right now. But you're right, you put your finger on a interesting verse. We'll come back to that. Chapter 1, verse 26. Okay, thank you. Other questions? Okay, so the official party line, the official message of the Hebrew Bible is, there is one God in the language of Deuteronomy. There is none else. Ein od milvado. There is no other. Period. However, if one reads the Hebrew Bible carefully, as no doubt you will in the coming weeks, or even not so carefully, just read straight along, it's pretty obvious that the Hebrew Bible itself is aware that out there, the situation is very complicated. And this idea that we Israelites worship the one true God and there is none else, the Bible itself gives us lots of information to show. The Bible itself is aware that this view is not without critics. This view is not without dissonance. So let's go talk about that. So we'll talk about these 2 points. There is no other God. I'm going to give it that. Now we'll talk about the one of punishment. I'll come back to that. So there is no other God. The Bible is full of stories of idolatry. What is idolatry? Idolatry in the Hebrew scriptures, there is no word, by the way, in the Hebrew Bible for idolatry. It's a nice Greek-English word, but the Bible nowhere conceptualizes this mysterious thing called idolatry. But the Bible instead gives us lots of stories and some polemics in which we see the Bible recognizes certain kinds of behavior as wrong. And we lump these behaviors together under our title of idolatry. One kind of behavior is called idolatry, is to worship another God. An Israelite may not worship any God other than the one true God. And if an Israelite worships a God other than the one true God, that's bad. That's a sin. Said Israelite is liable to punishment from the one true God. that can be called idolatry. And if you ask, how about Ammonites or Moabites or Jebusites or Arameans or Philistines, is it okay for them to worship other gods? At this point, the Bible is notoriously vague. The Bible is not so much interested in whom the Ammonites worship. Right? They can worship Milcom, they can worship Chemosh, and they can worship Baal, or they can worship wherever they want to worship. Not my problem. The Bible is making interested that the Israelites shouldn't worship. So foreign worship, that's something we call idolatry. The other thing the Bible calls idolatry is the worship of images. Images. Israelites are not allowed to make an image of anything in the heavens or the earth or below the earth, as I'm paraphrasing here the Ten Commandments. Even if the Israelites who make the image are intending to represent the one true God, even if that's their intent, it is still forbidden. And certainly all the more so if they're making an image of some other God, in which case they're now compounding two errors. One is prohibition of imagery, the other is prohibition of worship of another God. This is the official storyline in the Hebrew Bible, right? This is forbidden, don't do it. And Israelites who did it have thereby sinned and will bring down upon themselves the justifiable, condign wrath of God. Exactly. Right? That's the storyline of Hebrew scriptures, right? Look at the grand narrative of the Hebrew Bible. The Bible begins in Genesis chapter 1 with the one true God creates heaven and earth, creates everything, creates human beings, gets the ball rolling, human society, civilization take off. God destroys them again because he doesn't like the way things turned out. And then he tries again with Noah and the flood. Still doesn't turn out so well. So he picks a specific clan, family to focus his attention on, right? And meanwhile, all we have is one true God. There were no other gods anywhere. And then somewhere along the line, a key moment, which the Bible nowhere discusses, somebody invented idolatry. Some sinful, thoroughly wicked, thoroughly rebellious, contumacious, obstreperous individual came up with the idea there's more than one true God. There are other gods. We should worship them. And the Israelites, he, she, they seduced the Israelites. That's the imagery that's often used in the Bible, right? Sexual imagery. They seduced the Israelites to go a-whoring, to go astray after other gods. And the Israelites did so. And then they suffered punishment from God for their sins. This is the master narrative of the Hebrew Bible. Until finally, at certain moments, some Israelites repent. Then God doesn't get so angry. He saves a few. He wipes these people out, but these people he keeps. Then in turn, they fall, they go sliding, also backsliding. So they're going to have to punish them some more. Right, and this is a constant narrative. Rebellion against God, followed by repentance and return, followed by rebellion, followed by repentance and return. And ultimately, this explains why the Israelites are exiled from their land, why the temple of Jerusalem is destroyed, and why the Israelites, a certain small number, finally are privileged to return to their land and to rebuild the temple. And that's pretty much where the grand narrative of the Hebrew Bible stops. However, if you are a modern Bible scholar and or you are an attentive reader of Scripture, you realize everything I just said is false. Or, that's too strong. Everything I just said is a highly prejudiced way of representing Israelite history. Because in fact, it's backwards. So the Bible would have you believe that the world begins with monotheism, I'm going to use that word, with the one belief and worship of the one true God, and then the world lapses into some idolatrous mode of worship, which is a rebellion against the one true God. Whereas, according to modern Bible scholars, we are convinced that this is simply completely backwards. That the world begins with the worship of many gods. There are national gods. Each nation has its own chief god or gods. There are domestic gods. There are gods of nature. There are all kinds of gods. Gods with temple, gods without temples, gods with domestic shrines, all kinds of gods for worship in all kinds of different ways by a wide variety of people. And the Israelites are no better, no worse, no different than anybody else. They too worship a wide variety of gods. Again, the national, domestic. Classic example of the domestic gods. Any archaeology student will tell you one way you know an Israelite settlement. Interesting archaeological question. When you're digging up, shards of the bottom layer of a house, what society are you looking at? Is it Israelite or is it not Israelite? Interesting question, right? So one way to know, there are all kinds of archaeologists have come up with various ways of trying to distinguish between Israelite archaeological remains and non-Israelite archaeological remains. They don't say on it Israelite, right? They don't have big Hebrew letters on it, so you don't know. So one way to know, there are various ways. One way to know is if you find these things in the layer, the domestic architecture, you can be 99% sure it's Israelite. Because these are found by the thousand. These are small figurines. The top half seems to be a figure of a woman from the waist up, with usually very prominent breasts, right? Stylized woman, you can see that. And whenever scholars see large breasts, we assume immediately it must be fertility, because what else are large breasts for? Right? So we have these must be fertility figurines, some kind of domestic piety. These are found in houses. Right. So what the Israelites did with these figurines, we don't know, but clearly they are part and parcel of domestic Israelite culture. So much so if you find these things, you can be pretty sure you're digging into an Israelite house. Now, class, what would you call these figurines? I know what I would call them. I would call them idolatry. But that doesn't make any sense, because the Israelites who have these things don't think it's idolatry. They think that this is a perfectly reasonable way to behave, to encourage women to have healthy children, to encourage the sheep to bear young, to encourage the process of nature and fertility upon which their lives depend. That's not idolatry. I would call that religion, culture, civilization. One of those mysterious words you discussed in Anthropology 101, right? One of those words. This is not idolatry. So for somebody to come along later and say that things like this is idolatrous, is somebody coming along later and trying to reinterpret, to reimagine Israelite history and culture from a very particular perspective. And to be very honest, ladies and gentlemen, a biased perspective, a prejudiced perspective, a non-historical perspective. So according to modern Bible scholars, we get a view such as this. Israelite religion does not begin with worship of the one true God. Israelite religion begins with the worship of various gods, and lurking behind these mysterious varied names of God probably are different modes of worshiping God, perhaps different gods, and gods get melded, blended. So the various names of God probably once upon a time concealed different gods. So when do Israelites discover the one true God? Or I can use the word monotheism, belief in the one God. According to the standard view, which has been endlessly debated, I'll give you the standard view. And Chris Hayes talks about that in her article on your reading. According to the standard view, sometime in the 8th century BCE, we have the rise of the God alone party, in the memorable words of my teacher, Martin Smith, in his wonderful book. There's a movement, a school, he called it a party. He didn't mean a party with beer, he meant a party, a group, a movement. Say, the reason we Israelites are getting into trouble, the reason the Assyrians are beating us up, and the reason why we Israelites are in a great deal of distress is because we're not worshiping our God properly. Our God is a jealous God, and our God does not want you to worship other gods. Henceforth, we should worship the one true God and that God alone. The imagery that's used to understand this relationship is marriage. Just as a wife is obligated to have exclusive loyalty to her husband, similarly, the people of Israel, now imagined as the wife, might owe exclusive loyalty to their consort, who is God. Just as an adulterous wife gets kicked out, similarly, an adulterous Israel will lose divine protection. This imagery you find in the book of Hosea, this most famously, from the 8th century BCE. Here we have a group of people, thinkers, philosophers, we might say, who are trying to reimagine Israelite religion and arguing the key point which we have screwed up until now, which henceforth we will get straight, is now we're going to worship the one true God and one true God alone. Interesting question, Mr. Hosea, Mr. Isaiah, Mr. Amos, these prophets who apparently are the spokespersons of this new movement, if you trust modern Bible scholarship, it's new. How about other gods out there? There are other gods out there, aren't there? Oh yes, there are other gods out there. We're not interested in them. They're not my problem. As long as you worship the one true God alone, you are satisfying the divine mandate, like the wife. There are other husbands out there, but they're no consequence to me. I am my husband. Pay attention to your husband. Don't worry about other husbands. This is sometimes called monolatry. Latry, L-A-T-R-Y, from the same root as an idolatry. Same root. Latry means to worship. So the emphasis is worshiping on the one God, not so much on the theological concept whether there are other gods, but focusing on the fact that Israel is liable to punishment if it worships any other God other than the one true God. However, as the centuries go by, we believe modern Bible scholarship, in the 6th century BCE, we have the intensification of this school, this God alone school, and now comes forward the idea, at least this is again, all these points are debated. This is kind of the standard view. The 6th century BCE, when the Israelites have been exiled to Babylon, the Babylonians have destroyed their temple, exiled them, and now in dribbles and drabs, they are coming back or dream of coming back. At this point, God's power, paradoxically, is not imagined as less than before, but divine power is imagined as even greater. You know those Babylonians who beat us up and destroyed the temple and exiled us? Well, they were working with God. They're on the God team. They just don't know. Because there is only one God, period. How about Baal and Nebo and Marduk? Nothing, I tell you. Just smoke and mirrors, figments of the imagination, vapor. Pay them no heed, because they are things of naught. That's the 6th century BC. When all of a sudden we discover not just monolatry, but we discover what we might want to call monotheism, the idea that there is only one God and there is none else. This set of beliefs from the 6th century BC is then projected backwards onto Israelite history, is then projected backwards onto the narratives of Israel, is then projected backwards onto the story of the creation of God, as if Adam and Eve knew only the one true God, as if all the figures of Genesis know only the one true God, because there is no one else. And the entire narrative of the books of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, is rewritten from this perspective, showing the Israelites sin. They sin by rebelling against this one God, and then they are punished. And then when they are loyal to this God, they prosper. And the narrative is written from that perspective. And it is that perspective, which you might say, is the Bible's perspective. Even if from our point of view, it is not historical. You want to call that truth or not, that's up to you. I'm not going to touch that. It is certainly not factually historical, even if it may be theologically true. All right, my time's just about up. I'm going to stop here. We'll continue this on Wednesday, and Wednesday also look at some timelines and try to make these things clearer to you. Thank you.
Okay. Whoops.
Hello, everyone. Welcome.
There. Enough of that for now. So I'm unmuting. I guess I. So everybody can unmute if they wish. And Pat and Marty did join us.
Yes, we did. Thank you.
Okay, I have something in chat. Let me see what that is. Oh,
Okay.
so it was a little ragged, but did everybody understand and hear it all? You didn't. I see shaking heads.
I heard it. I'm not sure I understood it.
Agreed.
What I found is I found it kind of hard to understand some of the words. It was sort of blurred. The audio was kind of blurred on my computer. I got it, but I had to struggle to make sure I was understanding the words, not the content, but just the verbalization.
Okay.
Right, Rudy.
I'm so
I
curious.
hope for closed captioning for the hearing impaired because I did have some struggling. Also with some of the concepts.
I'm so curious how people feel about, I mean, I'm hearing people say they had a little trouble hearing it and stuff, but I'm very curious about, I wondered about this for the first lecture as well. When you hear the Bible being talked about from a perspective that isn't specifically from the Christian or the Jewish tradition, and looking at scripture more with a scholarship perspective and a historical perspective. And also like today, some of the content that says, you know, historically, we have evidence that says that this was like, this idea of monotheism, for example, was imposed on history and kind of rewritten through that perspective, and how that impacts. I'm just curious how other listeners to these lectures are hearing that. I know people told me like, oh, when you go to seminary, like it'll mess with your faith because you learn, you know, a lot of times for us, that's where we're learning things like this. And it can rock, like if you've never heard anything like that before, that, you know, there are things in the Bible that are written from a particular perspective or to a particular community going through a particular thing, or that it's written down way after the time that was actually happening, that can be very troubling for people. And some of this actually, I did not know. So I'm just curious how that hits people, if that's a surprise.
I think sometimes it's harder to understand it because we're so used to the New Testament and the Gospel. So when we go back to learn about the Old Testament, which is the I guess, to the New Testament, we have to have the Old before you can have the New. And you start learning the law and the traditions, it's hard for us as learning mainly the Gospel to understand it. Does that make sense?
When I'm hearing it, it's kind of a relief because reading the Old Testament, you're saying to yourself, well, did they believe in a punishing God? You know, all these different things. Or, well, they're saying this here and they're saying that there. And what's the true story? So this is a relief. I've heard some of this before, but I'm going to be getting it in a lot more depth here. And it's a relief. Okay. I think now, obviously, the people who came later, who actually wrote or revised what had come earlier, are going to do it from their perspective. And in a certain way, it's true of the New Testament too, that nobody was taking dictation when Jesus was speaking and it was all written down, 70 years later or longer. So they had all the insights too that came later. So I'm feeling good about this.
I find it unsettling, but I wanted to be challenged in my suppositions and assumptions growing up in the church. But I always thought it was linear. God created earth and then created humans, and they didn't listen, so they were expelled from the garden. And then to find out that it's not in that linear sequence, I find that, tilting 5 degrees, especially being raised that it's sacrosanct, everything in the Bible is true. So I'm glad I signed up for this, because now my assumptions are being challenged. And I find it interesting, Rudy, that you're finding relief from it. So maybe I'll be able to adopt your perspective and find it less troubling as a result.
Okay, Nancy, I have to tell you, I'm using my husband's computer. His name is Rudy, and I'm Carol.
Oh, hello, Carol.
Yeah, that's so funny. Nancy, I so appreciate what you just shared. And if I can I'm going to say one more thing and then I'll be quiet. But I know I talk to our, sometimes the confirmation kids when we talk about like the creation myth, for example, and just to use the word myth for some people is like really unsettling. Our instruction from the Lutheran Christian tradition, at least in the ELCA, is that, there can be great meaning, and there can be, we can learn a lot about God and about how God has worked in the world through story that's passed down, even if it's not like scientifically factual as we today consider something to be scientifically factual, or like in a linear fashion where this happened and then this happened. It's not a newspaper account. But that, in my first weeks of seminary, that was very surprising, because I'd never had that conversation with anybody. Or, maybe it was told to me and I just didn't hear it. Let's say that. I'll be fair to people who taught me confirmation and things like that. So it can be unsettling. But I'm just curious where people are at.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
I think actually Pastor Heidi used an important word here that, at least for our purposes, we may want to elaborate, and that's the word myth. Because in our modern context, if we say something is a myth, our inference or our statement is it's not true. There's other meanings for that word, and from the standpoint of what we're looking at here, myth is really a shared story among a group of people, a nation, a faith, a religious group, a tradition, but it's some shared story, which is one of the things that binds them together as part of their identity. So the Hebrew Bible and the stories in it are mythic in the sense that those are the stories that created them and binds them together as a community. Now we as Americans have myths, and their importance doesn't lie so much in their, whether or not their historicity is the fancy word, whether or not they really happened, but their importance lies in the fact that they are shared stories which are important to us. One is, for instance, Paul Revere. Paul Revere really did ride, and he did most of what they say he did. But the point is that is also a mythic story, and it's one of those stories which we share that creates our identity as Americans. So I think that, I'm glad Pastor Heidi brought that word up, because I think, from our standpoints, these are mythic stories from the standpoint of these are stories which go to bind together the Jewish people and later on Christians to some extent. There also are shared stories, although we highlight, as one said, we highlight different spots in the book. So anyways, that makes sense to everybody, or do you want me
Yes.
to? Yeah.
You just clarified a lot that was running through my mind. Thanks, Mitch.
So So you could think of these as the importance of them is not, and Professor Cohen will mention it several times, the importance is not really about whether they happened or how they happened in actuality, but more the importance of them is how did these stories work to create and bind together a people?
Hmm.
You know, because this is how eventually, this is what it means to be a Jew, is to understand these stories in a certain way.
Mhm.
Just as we are Christians because we understand the stories both in the Old Testament and the New Testament in a certain way. So
Mhm.
I'll stop there before I run too far off the rails. So, is there anything else?
Not to monopolize, but I didn't understand what he was talking about. I think it was ball, and he said it's all vapor. I didn't understand.
Yeah. Okay. What he was talking about was the transition. Initially, the way, and this is the way Bible and Bible scholars have understood the progression of events, and so it's hotly debated, as he says. But initially, it was understood that the Israelites were to worship only one God, and it did not presuppose, it did not state that it did not deny the existence of other gods explicitly. So the initial belief was that the Israelites were required to worship their one God, but as he said, he didn't care who the Moabites worshiped. He didn't care, God doesn't care who the other guys worship. God only cares who the Israelites worshiped. And as he says, there's frequently sort of a marriage analogy used. So subsequently, after a couple of hundred years, there was an evolution, and instead of the God of the Israelites being one, possibly of several possible gods, then it became God of the Israelites is the only God. And so what he was talking about there was, the other gods were, for instance, vapor, or the other gods did not exist. They denied the existence of other gods, of other deities. So, and for instance, if you read the Psalms, and this of course is handy when you read the Psalms and you'll look at the language, the poetry in the Psalms, and there are a number of references in the Psalms where they are condemning the people that have these gods because you made them with human hands. They're made out of wood, and they're not gods. They're just wooden figurines. So they're not gods. So that's really where that context is coming from. So it's not just denying that Israelites shouldn't worship other gods. It's basically saying there are no other gods. Does that make sense, Nancy?
Okay, that helps. Thanks.
Yeah.
Of course, it makes me think of the golden calf, but
Yeah. And that'll come up when, and actually there's a backstory to that he'll talk about and we'll elaborate on.
okay, thanks.
Anything else?
Well, I'm going to say good night.
Oh, okay.
All right. So take care.
Okay, so the recording of this will be on the website, and I will work with various people to try and improve the technology. So
Thanks.
Thanks, Mitch, so much.
you're welcome.
Yes.
We got a bunch of times to do
Thank
this, so I'll get it right before I'm done.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Good night, Edna.
Good night.
So you got on okay, Marty?
Yep, we did. Thanks. It asked for the number, the meeting number, and once I put that in, it came through, Mitch.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I'll send the meeting out number. When I send out again, I'll send out the meeting number too. Just make sure people know what it is.
Yes, thanks.
Okay. I'll see you tomorrow night
Yes, thank you very much, Mitch.
at 7:00.
Yep, 7 o'clock.
Take care.
Good night, Pat.
Good night.